Noting the hour in the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting to order. First up, we have citizens' comments. I believe we have a citizen coming. Please say your name and your
It's
location.
Tara from Mass Ave. Can you hear me? Yes, grand. There's no recycling in this room. There's paper in the trash can, and we're upset. That's another thing. And the planning board canceled its meeting in August because there's nothing to do. We got MBTA zoning, land clearing, climate emergency, and there's nothing to do because there's no developer applications. Just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Alyssa, do you have anything to share with us as our other audience member? All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on to the Minuteman Superintendent update, which Christine will lead us in.
I will. This is going to be just as frustrating for you as it was for me. So as we know, the Minuteman Superintendent is currently on leave and under investigation for a variety of potential issues that are all alleged. So I met with Pam Norse, our liaison to the Minuteman School Committee, our school committee representative, sorry, on the Minuteman School Committee. She was the chair. She is no longer the chair. Her term was up. She is grateful for that. We had a conversation or around a conversation because the investigation is ongoing. So they're doing most of what they're looking into under executive session, consulting with their lawyers, and unfortunately, not saying anything. So, you know, at this point, they have a interim principal for the year and a temporary superintendent who has agreed to cover at least the first couple of months, and then they would go from there. And I think, you know, part of that is any longer commitment would suggest a confirmation that the current superintendent would not be returning, which of course they can't legally do. I expressed that I thought it was unlikely that they would be able to return, given that there was a 100% vote of no confidence by the employees of the school, and that felt like it would be very difficult, in which case, basically, if they find cause, then there would be a separation under contract, and if they don't find cause, I imagine there will still be a separation for Minuteman, in which case Minuteman would then have to find some compensation package for her. So either way, it's costing us money now in legal fees and in interims, and it's going to cost us money down the road regardless. The current principal is temporary because whoever is the superintendent at the end of the day should get to pick their staff and who they work with long-term. That's not much information. There's another executive session next week, and I inferred from our conversation that there's a hope to have a resolution that can be expressed to the public by the end of next month. That's unfortunately most of it. I expressed our concern at the lack of communication in general, because there's not even been to any statement from the school committee of any kind, not even a vague one. So people find out anything is going on simply because the agenda's been posted on Facebook, or it's been posted and then it is reposted on Facebook, and then there's lots of misinformation. So it's been challenging. There have been many moves to replace current school committee members in other towns. And surprisingly, other towns saying, we don't really have a process to do that. It never occurred to them to do other than to continue to put the person who was currently on back in. So there's some interesting challenges going forward. The only other, I guess, thing I would add is you know, the teachers voted unanimously no confidence in the superintendent. The search committee included 4 teachers from Minuteman. It included 4 school committee members. It included community representatives and other stakeholders. The backgrounds were done by MASC, who typically does that sort of pre-search and hands over, you know, potential people, and the vote for Dr. Dawson was unanimous. So, one way or another, whether she is a, excellent superintendent or not, she certainly came across as one. So that's the situation that they're dealing with in general. So, I'll answer any vague question vaguely that I can, but, I'm sure you all can understand the problem with trying to get further details before the investigation is concluded. But it's a problem. It's an entity we spend a lot of money on.
Am I correct in inferring that the four members, the four teachers that were part of the search committee are still there and have completely changed their vote?
So that's a good question. They have had some teacher loss. I can look into, I can go look at public records and see who was on that search committee. I don't believe that all four of those teachers have left.
Do you, I know that this is an impossible question, I'm just asking for your sense of it. Do you believe that this will be resolved before the first day of school, which is what, the 4th week of August?
I suspect it will be resolved before school starts. Yes, I do.
And
Well, at least I don't know about final resolution, but their ability to discuss what the results are going to be. I believe it'll be the end of next month, so before school starts.
And I'm not expecting you to answer this now, but just a question that I would like to pose to you, and you can come back at your own time. If other towns are looking at their representatives to the school committee, what are your feelings on Ms. Norris? And do you feel that that's something that we need to investigate, potentially rallying for a change or rallying behind our representative for doing the right thing and serving us well? Again, I don't expect you to answer this now, but it is something that I would like your input on, since you're the most closely watching person on this topic. So just a bug in your ear, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I've got some extra skin in the game. Both of my current high schoolers are at Minuteman. So my sense, it was interesting. I had the question in my head that I no point in asking, which was that she worked closely with Dr. Dawson. We had her here, Pam and Dr. Dawson, and I went to, you and I went to a meeting at Minuteman. They worked together. They seemed very congenial, but she can't at this point obviously tell me her sense of working with Dr. Dawson or what she thought of her overall, or any of that impression. I expressed multiple times 3 or 4 times throughout our 2-hour conversation that I, just think that it's really unfortunate that they have, I understand that legal is telling them not to comment on things on Facebook or not to say certain things, but no statement at all, not one formal statement from a single school committee member saying, we understand your frustration. Here are the steps of resolving this in a general sense, and here's our hoped timeline, or anything. There's not a word. So that, to me, especially as the social media outcry, which is, Minuteman's very separate, so you're not going to meet for coffee much and talk to other parents. We're all in different towns, so that kind of is where that happens. And oh, this teacher left. They must have left because, or so sorry, this actually brings me to another thing, which was a rumor that Dr. Dawson was trying to defund the trades. And Pam made it clear under no circumstances was there ever any move to defund the trades. It's just not. There's no validity to that, and they never would. It never came before the school committee. They never saw any behavior in that way. It was never mentioned. It was not a thing, period. So, that stuff boils up and becomes bigger when you say nothing, right? They leave that vacuum. So I think, to me, I understand the frustration and people saying, well, then I've got to get in there to find out what's happening. Pam definitely seemed to have wanted it several times to have commented on certain things and been advised by legal not to. It's hard to say without having been in the room, but I really am strongly disappointed that there wasn't some active measure to say something to the member towns, to the community. So it'll be really interesting when this is resolved to see what message comes out. Is it simple and to the point, or does it do something to sort of, bring this back together and some sort of explanation? I don't know. Yeah, that's not much of an answer, but That's what I have right now.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I have a question. As I recall, a number of the administrators were leaving along with the principal. How does that stand at this point?
So they seem to be doing, they seem stable as far as the number of teachers that they are looking to fill are not outside of a normal number of teachers that they are looking to fill, and administrators. You know, I know that one of my daughter's teachers was elevated to, you know, the director of IT, but he was basically running that role anyway. They've got an acting principal. The acting superintendent had worked in the district and is familiar with the district, but I don't sense that there's a lot of open positions that they were having trouble filling. I should get numbers. I don't have exact numbers of how many administrators left because of this situation. So I'll try to get that information so we can be exact in our understanding of what the fallout, because there's no way this doesn't cost us money in the end, one way or another.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No? Okay, moving on. The next item we have on the agenda is a start of a cost of growth discussion, which will be led by Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is not something that I expect us to solve in, you know, one meeting or 1 month even, and if we get it done this chair year, I'd be impressed. But I wanted to start the conversation of making sure that we have at least a common ground understanding of what cost of growth actually means. So when we're presented with a new development or a potential zoning change or a recharacterization of a lot, just so that we have some kind of agreed upon, if not, you know, we're not going to get consensus. I don't think we'll get consensus in this room, let alone I don't think we'll get consensus in the entire community. But just some basic ground rules on ways of looking at what growth really does cost in this town. Some, I think, are easier than others. For years, we've been using the National Fire Chief's recommended number of firefighters in EMS per 1,000 in town. That's a relatively straightforward number for us to take the budget, do the appropriate calculations. That seems a little straightforward. So things like the number of firefighters, the number of police, these are some of the easier numbers for us to go track down. Where I think we're going to have a harder time is in talking to the school district, because we all agree that it's not a simple 15 more students equals another teacher. It doesn't work like that, because they're spread across 8 different schools and a whole bunch of different grades. But there is a postal step function in there somewhere. And I would like for us to ferret out what that postal step function really is. Is it 100 students? Is it 200 students? When is it appropriate for us to do what we did last year, which is to say, look, you've had 500 student decline in enrollment. It's time to lower the number of FTE. At the same time, it cuts the other way. What happens if we add 500 students over the next 3 years? What does that look like? Is there an acceptable working model that we can come up with so that we're having an intelligent conversation about the cost of growth and not just a more people is good or bad, depending on your preconceived view of what you want the town to be like. There are other components of this as well. If we add more people, does this mean we have to add sewers? Does adding sewers always add more people? Is there I would like to divide up some of the work and talk to some of the real estate agents in town and get a feel for, is a town, you know, is it easier to sell a house on a 1 acre lot, or is it easier to sell 4 houses on quarter acre lots? What are some of the inputs that we can try and come up with a holistic, if not perfect? I don't think we're going to find perfect here. I think there's going to be arguments at every step of the way on this. But I definitely want us to start having a conversation for what's the cost for another 50 people, another 100 people, another 500 people. Let's get some numbers around this. And this is the opening conversation, so I'd like you all to think in the back of your mind about which aspect of this you might have some interest in pursuing. we need to have someone talk to the water district. If you recall, not 2 years ago, the head of the water district sat in this room and said that they might not be able to turn on the water to the new twin school because they're not allowing any new hookups. Well, if you're not allowing any new hookups, that's a limitation of growth. If all of a sudden you are going to have more growth and you have to have more hookups, what is that? What's the postal step cost of getting to that next level? What about the wastewater treatment plants in town? How close are we to capacity? And what is the next logical growth chunk for those different entities? These all have bearing on how we have to spend our money over the next handful of years. So as I said, firefighters and police officers, that's a relatively straightforward mathematical calculation. Water department, harder. Sewers, harder. School district, not easy to do. But I think if we don't have a holistic approach to this, then it's going to be a constant, well, okay, let's, what if we take this last parcel of land or this next parcel of land that was commercial or was open space, not that open space is easy to change, I'm just throwing it out there. What happens if we change to that perspective? What are some of the realistic expected impacts of the MBTA law that are coming? If we really let's have a worst and best case scenario for what happens there, rather than just have we'll comply with the law. Okay, well, let's have a better feeling of what complying feels like and looks like, so that we can at least intelligently advise the town about what's going to happen to their taxes, their home values, potentially the feel of the town over the next handful of years. So again, this is just the opening conversation. I think I should probably start by asking if the committee thinks that I'm barking up the wrong tree here, if this is a fool's errand to even attempt and not worth our time, or if this is something that we should put our efforts into, and if people are willing to potentially carve off one component of this at a time and divvy it up amongst those of us on the committee. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to get a sense of the committee.
I think Scott, I saw it. Let's go with Steve. Yeah.
We'll take turns. You go first, and I'll go second. All right, so our metric is tax dollars. With, how do we equate all this stuff in cost? Because people or counting heads can be somewhat nuanced. Families with kids who don't pay, if families have an average of 2 kids, then they need to pay about $36,000 in property taxes just to cover the school budget. Never mind all the rest of the stuff. Are we trying to say that all people are created equal? Are we looking, what's the cost of another 55 and older development in town? It has a very different impact on our finances. Different services, obviously, more ambulances or more medical calls, but, what about commercial growth? So I'm trying to drive, what are we looking to measure? Or are we going after land use or incremental land use? If there's X amount of acres of unaccounted for land in town, what's the best use for them? Best use from a tax standpoint, or since we don't necessarily own them, I can guess that the best use from the person that does own them is to cover them up into half-acre lots and build $1 million houses.
But what is the external cost of that decision on the rest of the taxpayers in town?
It is significant, because whatever our much debated percentage of single-family residences with children in the school percentage is, which I think was 24 the last time I looked. If that ticks up a percent or two, what's that do to our budget? If it ticks down, What's that do to our budget? If we actually had some commercial growth in town, what would that do? It's down around 10% commercial. It used to be higher than that by a couple of percentage points anyway. So yeah, I guess I want to know what we're looking at in terms of, are we looking at the next plot of land and how it should be used, and what our metrics going to be?
Jason, I think it's a good thought. When I, what's that? Well,
You heard the but.
but I think that, I guess the way I look at this is that if you just gave me this assignment to go do this, right, just go figure all this out. I think the most valuable piece of this, I would think, would be the data collection of understanding. So you can do that through surveys, talking to people. I think the risk in doing something like this would be to go to the head of the fire department and say, what's your metric? And then write that down without any validation. And then, because then you have a collection of people's opinions of the people that we talk to. And then that becomes into a model, and then the model may work this year, but because we didn't talk to everybody and get enough data collected, that the model might be not valid next year, just because of the inputs that we received. So I think it'd be very interesting to maybe like do a survey or something to, kind of hit the topics that you're trying to get, to try to get maybe, town participation in this, to see, craft it in a way that we can get an idea of what an average person does based on age, all these other factors. How, and if you get a meaningful sample of the town with a survey response to questions that can drive the answers to these questions, then I think at that point, you might be able to derive some questions to ask maybe the senior people or the leaders in the town. It's like, we surveyed X number of people, and we found out that for every, extra person in town, they need an extra gallon of water. And how does that, you might be able to get to where you're trying to get to through a larger data collection. And then I just would think that, my first thought is that it's a great idea, needs a lot of validation of the data.
That's why I'm saying this is the opening salvo.
Yeah.
This is also why I'm saying I want to carve up the responsibilities amongst everyone. I don't want to dump it all on any one person's lap. Although, aren't you glad you're not the associate anymore? Because that's who we usually apply the new assignments to. Sorry. But yeah, absolutely. This is meant to be an opening conversation, and I don't expect this to be. I don't expect any one person on this committee to be able to handle this.
Oh, I understood that. I just was just thinking, I think it's a good idea. I just wanted to highlight what I thought would be a risk, which is just going to like the head of whatever in town and getting their number or their ratio and using that.
Agreed, but it might not be a bad place to start. I mean, what is the average water use per person in town right now? That's a fact. You can't extrapolate from that if you add another 100 people, you're gonna need somewhere on the environs of 100 times the average water usage in town. Mm-hmm. Do we have that kind of capacity? Yes or no? So that's, absolutely, I hear what you say about you having a survey. I hear what you say about getting inputs, and I definitely hear what Steve said about making sure that we're defining our goals very cleanly, which, again, we've only just had this conversation now for 10 minutes, so it's a good place to start.
A lot of the basic data is available.
Could you please get closer to the mic?
A lot of the basic data is available. The National Fire Protection Association publishes, how many firemen you need per 1,000 people. It's the FBI, actually, that puts out the police staffing based on crime reports. But again, it's so many patrolmen per 1,000. I'm sure there's statistics on classroom size. So if you know your enrollment, you know how many teachers you should have. As far as wastewater and water, the state DEP has very extensive metrics on how much you need of each. And it's, for residential, it's based on bedrooms. So it's 110 gallons a day per bedroom. So, and they have, again, the same kind of information available for commercial uses. So that kind of data is readily attainable. The question then becomes, that's kind of high-level data, and then you have to somewhat massage it a bit to fit what you're trying to get at. But the data's around.
Is this the sort of endeavor that a more typical planning board would be doing to plan, or are they typically just handling business requests, license requests? Roland, jump in, please. I am curious.
So, planning doesn't do that, in my opinion. They are just.
No, they don't, but do they in other communities?
Oh, that I wouldn't know, but, you know, what they're basically doing, somebody comes in with a subdivision or whatever, they review and go, yeah, it meets the guidelines or it doesn't meet the guidelines. You know, if they're looking at a plan, does it meet the setbacks and et cetera, square foot, area ratio, all that stuff, right? And then changing zoning here and there. But I don't think they do anything like, well, if, you know, we add another 50 homes, we need another X gallons of water and everything else. And I mean, we talk about water, right now, we have an abundance of it. But last July, we didn't, right? We were in a drought.
Well, we have abundance that we can't use most of right now.
Right, you can't use it right now, so.
Right.
Because it's not, hasn't percolated and everything else.
We have the PFAS problem.
So, right, well, that's another issue in itself, too.
Yeah.
And that's just not, they said, the latest I heard on PFAS was 75% of the US water has PFAS in it. So it's not just affecting Acton, it affects the whole country. We're gonna understand that. I mean, everything from carpeting, draperies, furniture, non-stick cookware.
Fast food containers.
And a whole bunch of other stuff, and it goes on, plastics, it just goes on and on and on. Have those, and it's not just one chemical, it's like 1,000 chemicals or more than that. So
Yep.
there's been other discussions on how they're going to work to see if they can treat it, and we're not there with yet as a nation, and there are companies that are working on that.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the
Okay,
electric grid.
tangent.
Right, it's tangible, and that's it.
Come back.
But they're
So
not,
our planning board doesn't do this sort of thing, and you're not sure if, do you know?
I would
Hold on, they should.
doubt if other ones.
They
are.
should, this is something that,
I was saying, if you read the top responsibility, should be studying the resources and needs of the town, particularly conditions affecting public welfare and safety related to land use and development. To me, that means looking at
Yeah.
water and things like that.
That's great. I'm happy to hear what they have to say. In the meantime,
I think we
judging
should-
from the fact that I don't believe we have that information in our hands, I think it's a fine thing for us to pursue.
I think we should have them in.
I was gonna
Tell us.
say, I mean, if they're
Right.
not being asked by any other entity to help out with this, then maybe we try to make it some sort of partnership, right?
sorry. And then on from that, I would say that for the schools, one of the first metrics, if I were them, would be what number of children gets us over hold harmless? Because it's more children that ends up saving us money, because we'll get more money back from the state. So that would be if I were the schools looking for a first start, how many more children gets us to out of hold harmless?
These are all metrics I want to see.
For what we get from state funding, per pupil, it's the cafeteria fund, yeah, we're currently getting more than we should per number of students, because we had more students, and that set the rate, and when our student number drops, they don't drop the rate, they leave it, and you're in hold harmless, where you're getting more than you should, until your numbers go back up, or they reset the rates. And they've reset the rates a little, so there's a number of students that we can add where we actually get more money back from the state, and it's a couple million, it's a significant amount more. Once we get over hold harmless, it would actually drop the school's costs as a balance.
I was just going to add that where there is a constraint now, North Acton wastewater, I don't think it's the planning board that does it, but because the request usually comes from the Board of Health. But if somebody wants to add a bedroom or do something in the district, because we're under basically a capacity limitation, we get a letter saying, before anyone in town can approve this extra bedroom, you guys have to sign off that you have capacity to do that. So that's because have a capacity constraint. I'm kind of surprised, but I don't know, that there are other parts of town that might fall into the same situation. But yeah, there is procedurally, there is a check to see that the resources are available before they approve things.
How about this side? Roland? Dave?
Yeah, it sounds like, I'll just echo the planning board's responsibilities should handle a lot of this, and they should have a lot of these constraints. I always think it's interesting, the school, they put out that brochure at town meeting, and it does have comparable data of Acton versus all the other communities, and it's interesting if you look at student population in other school districts and the cost per student. Yeah, I'm sorry. The school puts out a brochure at town meeting, and the brochure has a bunch of interesting data and statistics in it. And one of them is cost per student, as well as like student population. And then you can compare Acton against a bunch of, size-wise comparable communities in the area, et cetera. But it does have, it would give you some idea just on the marginal cost of an additional student. But I think I like the idea of it. I guess I would question, what the impact would be from an influence perspective. Is it like recommending something to ALG, and how would you impact development? I mean, is it through the, the different groups that would approve new developments or new, et cetera? I think it could just, at the very least, be informative to us, but it sounds like a lot of information is probably pretty readily accessible in other groups or in other formats, rather than us inventing the wheel. Looking at some of these, I'm thinking just out loud, about what Steve said, and, just guidelines on how to structure police departments or water districts or sewer or whatever. And then when they looked at West Acton sewers, there was a lot of talk about what that would do to the cost of capacity at the treatment center and what percentage utilization they were at. Again, I do think a lot of that information is available from a sewer perspective, not applicable obviously to the majority of the town, but no, I like the idea of having more information and more data, and to maybe to circle to Steve's point, to what end, would we use this? Is it just from a taxpayer recommendation perspective? I do really like how we just put an average tax increase cost per family or per household in our recommendations, or we talk to that in town meeting. I do think it's one nice, easy number for a household to say, oh, 300 more a year to support this project. Okay, it gives you something. If we do get too into the weeds with that explanation, you can go off message or lose people's focus. 300 to 500 or whatever the number is just like, boom, this isn't free. You're paying for this, and this is the cost on average to an average household. So I don't think we used to do that years ago as well as we're doing now. We're just doing more of that, and I think we should keep that up.
PFAS is 173 different chemicals. I found out from a chemical engineer.
Vlad? You want to add anything? All right, Isha?
So I love the idea and I love the thought behind it. I was going to ask the exact same question as Christine asked, which is, where does the planning board come in? where does the town planning department come in, more to the fact. I don't want us to be all things to all people, and I think we're sort of, even though this has significant financial implications, and I completely understand why we would be doing this, and I support it wholeheartedly, I just feel like there is a risk that we may be diluting our own authority to a certain extent and maybe influence in trying to wade into this as well by ourselves, So I think I would be open to a collaborative effort with the planning department, with the planning board, or something like that. I would hesitate to take this on as FinCom alone, personally.
I'm absolutely love this to be collaborative, but I don't want it to be a situation where we're waiting on them and they're waiting on us and nothing moves forward. So
Correct.
I have no problem with us, it's entirely possible that we can start having these conversations, we can start going down a path and then have members of the community, members of the municipal staff, members of the school staff come in and, constructively criticize where we're coming from and what our inputs are and the rest. I definitely think this has to be collaborative. As I said, I don't anticipate we're going to get to a consensus. I don't think we're going to get to a point where everyone's
Yeah.
going to say, oh yeah, this model makes perfect sense and
I-
so glad we consolidated it down into
Yeah.
one working model. That's not going to happen. But in the absence of any of this, so multiple people have said the data's out there. That's great. But I would love for us to, as advisors to the town, I would love for us to be the ones to start synthesizing it. If this gets picked up by the planning board or by another division in town, so be it. I'm all for it. But in the meantime, I don't feel like I have a nice synthesized view. And to Scott's point, I can't do this on my own. That's why I'm trying to
Yeah.
farm this out to everyone else at the committee to help me consolidate this and synthesize it and try and present a unified look at it. And that's not to say that I want to publish a 50-page paper that I expected everyone at town meeting to read. That's lunacy. But I think as we have these conversations, I think it's going to, by default, it's going to show us some areas that perhaps we have not focused on in the past. And hopefully we have, the three audiences, the high-level audience, the one paragraph that we say at town meeting, the much more in-depth conversation that we have with ALG and the rest of the hardcore committees, and then the 50-page document with all of and a nested spreadsheet with all the inputs for the people that really want to wonk out and try and figure out how to get to the deeper truth, signal in the noise.
I completely support that, Jason. I just have to point out, maybe unnecessarily, that, we may not have the same objectives necessarily. There might be conflicts in what each party brings to that conversation.
I expect that to
right?
happen, actually.
So I don't think we might get to a consensus, but at least if we can get to what are the big things that are going to impact the town's finances going forward, that might be a start.
Madam Chair?
Tara, wait a second. Okay. Did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Two things. One I will point out, as I've pointed out to all of you at one point or the other, we're the only committee on town that actually has support in the bylaw to do long-range planning. And two, I think we should ask other committees to cooperate. They probably have data that we need to do this. But whether this works at all or not, I will say that we've been tiptoeing around the O word for a couple of years, and we keep thinking it's going to happen. This is all data we're going to need then, because the first thing we have to establish before an operating can have a chance of success is that we've been good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. And we're going to need this data to establish that, we don't have too many policemen, we don't have too many fires, we don't have too many, this or that. So it's a worthy exercise to collect the data. Where it goes from there, I'm kind of with you, Isha. We could be getting off into something we maybe don't want to do, but got to get the data first.
I think this is a wonderful committee or some such to set up where you bring all these various stakeholders together. This can't be something we own
Okay.
exclusively. It won't be useful. At that point, it can be us pointing to it saying, okay, this is why you shouldn't do that development or whatever, which is ideally, that's what the planning board does. And it's because they have all of the information that all of the groups have come together and provided. It's water district and waste treatment and everyone sitting in the same room understanding, okay, that's why you care about how much parking lot there is in here because of the wastewater. Everyone else, getting enough people in the same room to understand each other's positions would be hugely beneficial for any way that the town grows. It's going to be a more holistic understanding growth. Hopefully also fewer arguments of people standing up saying, no, you want this or that, which, I mean, just a general legitimate improvement in the community, if we can set this up. I would love to have a more specific idea that I don't imagine you fully have yet on what we would do with the data. Is this going to be something that we look at whenever we come to the warrants and their discussions of zoning bylaw changes? Or is it if CPC says someone's looking to do this, so like, okay, well, that will have this effect? Or is it, I could see it being useful in ALG. I think you run a risk, as Scott was mentioning, a little of going too high level or too deep. You can lose credibility on either side, which is why if you have this group of people together, then they have the credibility behind it inherently there. I think we also need to be really careful of whatever level we do it at, that we're not singling out groups. We can't be saying, I worry that you're going to run into legal problems if you start saying something like, well, we can't build that because that will attract families with kids. Families with kids, I do not believe are a protected class, but.
Children are protected.
Okay,
Children are protected
okay.
class.
Well, I think we need to figure out how to really drastically steer clear of that sort of stuff, but that said, you can stay high level. We're looking at residential versus
Yep.
commercial. There wasn't much talk in what you said yet about commercial development. And there are going to be different environmental, I mean, more broadly, not in our environment specifically, but water, sewage, road use, et cetera, use for commercial development. And I think we should definitely invite the planning board, and if anyone can think of other groups we should bring before us to get moving on this, that would be great.
The town has a planning department too, right? So
Yes.
maybe somebody from the planning department, a couple people from the planning board and a couple people from FinCom, and we could maybe make something happen.
Yeah.
Water, yeah, all of the entities, all the stakeholder entities, and if we could get one or two from each and collate this data, and you could make something very useful out of it.
And I definitely want to get to that point, but I also don't want to be stonewalled. I don't want to be at the point where if we approach
So
it.
negative.
I'm not trying to be negative, I'm trying to be realistic. What I don't want to have happen is I don't want to say we won't even start this until we have representatives from this, that, the other, and so forth. I believe we need to start. And hopefully, the work that we do will be seen as having value, and we'll be able to bring more people along with us. If they want to partner with us right from the start, fantastic, I would love to see that. But I don't want us to wait until we have representatives from 5 different organizations.
I would say the more politic way to approach what you're saying is take the softer touch parts of the project on by ourselves now, understanding value as perceived by realtors, et cetera. Does the bigger lots matter? Things like that. And those things really matter when we go talk to taxpayers about it.
Well, and the cut and dried ones, like the fire and the police.
Yeah.
That's a mathematical
Yes.
calculation, we can do that now. We can assign Steve to take care of that for us by our next meeting. But more or less, but some of the other more intangible ones, we definitely have to take a collaborative approach to that.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes. And along the collaborative lines, Steve, I presume that in addition to talking to the town sewage system, we should be talking to your, then, You handle waste in that area, right?
We are the second largest plant in
Yeah.
town. And then there's a lot of private plants as well. But if I can quote myself, which sounds odd from several years ago, when I think I started a similar pitch, all the entities in town have plants. We don't necessarily see all of them, but they're not so, they don't have their head in the sand saying there's no reason to plan for the future. The problem is, we all live in the same fiscal house, meaning the same people pay us the money. Mostly some very directly by the tax bill in the case of the water district, by a separate billing in the case of sewer districts by a separate billing. But essentially, if we all live in the same fiscal house, we can't all have a set of uncoordinated plans, We can't be deciding to add on a room to our fiscal house while we tear down the room below it. It makes no sense. So there's something to be said for at least some entity in town, at least collecting the data on what people are planning.
Tara?
Favorite topic, thank you. Please don't let the perfect be the enemy of good enough. There's no way to get these kind of models perfect. I love the idea of income starting it because nobody else is going to. A lot of groups love growth. They love the money that comes from growth, even though it's cash rich and long-term debt poor. So they love to get application fees to pay for their raises. Nothing against anybody. Everybody wants raises, right? I have nothing against that. But when the incentive is to promote growth without understanding the overall cost, because you can walk away after 10 years of growing and retire, Roland, after basically setting up the village plans and all this stuff for all this growth, they walk away. It's not their fault, it's our fault for not directing the planning. I urge you to look at all the other studies. What the RAC is doing, they're doing a water study. They have a DocuShare folder where every time somebody gives you something, they just upload it in there. So that there's like a massive information of studies where anybody can go and look. So that way, it's like a data repository. The Mullins study was done for the town of Acton about 20 years ago. Still worth looking at. I urge you to do, let's see here. Oh, like even if you don't get to a model with a number, therefore you just put this in and therefore the magic number comes out. That sometimes just modeling or exploring can end up with it's good or it's bad by a little, a lot, or like a huge amount. So you understand whether this is a growth emergency or whether it's just something to plan for. So are we looking at build out, like the moves that have been made in land use have effectively tripled the build out expected in certain areas of the town. Is that the whole town now? So these are the kind of questions that can answer. I urge you to look at full staffing. You have departments that say that they're understaffed and that they're going to be asking for FTEs in the next years. And so if you don't include that now, what you're doing is you're creating a model based on false sense of security. So if you need 10 more people in town hall to satisfy current population, to presume the people that are hired are sufficient, I think is creates some what do you call it? Single points of failure in the modeling. For me, taxes are a social justice issue, and to keep Acton affordable means you got to keep taxes affordable because taxes are paid by renters too. I'm just saying that. Land use decisions, you either wait to buy it with cash or debt, or you make land use decisions now so that you preserve the land with policy, regulation, zoning, et cetera. And I say that making sure that you understand that I want an inclusive society here, but there are ways that we can do both. Preserve the land, keep taxes low, and have inclusivity by engaging in the things like the housing trust and other things to ensure affordability. I'm almost done here. I will be starting to submit studies to you, Jason. So I hope that you put them someplace so that we can go get them, like a DocuShare folder. That's all. Planning board. So there are many towns that I know of where the planning board takes on this and does it. There are a lot of towns that don't. There are a lot of towns where they just process applications. So I don't want to beat up on our planning board. Until they're directed to do planning, I think that planning is going to be up to FinCom to ask for the support. I mean, like, for example, Green Acton decided they wanted to figure out how many acres are destroyed every year. Went to the planning department, they said, we don't have time for that. So what happens? Now you got to go to the select board and get them, you got to get on the agenda to get them to direct the planning board to do something that seems so basic to me. When we first did the master plan, so it was 2008, I was on the planning committee. The planning board didn't know how many housing units there were. So think about that. The department that charges for the taxes sure does know. But the people across the hall don't know, and we're getting it from Wikipedia. That's still the level of planning that I see, because the last time there was a population growth study, they referred on city spaces or whatever it was on a line. And my last comment or question, actually, if the school gets more money for state aid because there's been growth, what does that do to the town costs if the percentage doesn't change? So if you add 1,000 kids and they get more state aid, the schools get more state aid, but the town has more costs to support the 1,000 kids, but the percentage didn't change. Anyway, it's just a thought, rhetorical question. I think that's all for now. Thank you. Yes, this is important. I hope I can help.
Thank you. Anything else you want to?
I think this is just the start. Thank you all.
Is there anything you would like us to sign up to do before we continue the discussion, or do you want to ponder this more before we?
I want to ponder this more, but do start thinking in the back of your minds if there's a piece of this that looks attractive to you, because we're going to carve this up the way that we carve up liaisons, the way we carve up liaisons as well. And I don't want to stick someone with something they have zero interest in.
Thank you. That moves us to our next agenda item, which is continuing our ALG discussion and recommendation. Christine.
All right. Okay, so this is, again, moving forward, not our point of view specifically, just our early recommendation prior to budgeting process for ALG. This is unchanged. This is the same slide that we've seen. It's based on the current ALG projections, and I confirmed with the town that these are the most recent revenue and spending projections available. Okay. So one of the things that was considered at the last meeting was how we would discuss our debt service in this ALG process at this point. This is our current excluded debt service, not changed, and then we went ahead and projected what a likely DPW building at $35 million with a interest rate of 4.85%, because that was the municipal borrowing rate the day that I created this graph. So then the onward conversation was, what about some of the other projects that are in the capital improvement plan? And how could we possibly include them? Should we include them at this point? This is the only project that so far has been sort of given anything that closely resembles a timeline, because we've spent money for it in warrant articles at town meeting to start this process. So that FY26 start is just a guess. We don't have anything formal. We don't have a final design. We don't have a final number. We don't have a final interest rate. So this is just a talking point to show that, you know, we went from here and said, when we do the twin school, it's going to bump your taxes up this much, but if you look down the line, it's going to come back down. So then they are looking at this DPW facility where obviously we're going to raise taxes for the next 30 years because the school is not going away, the fire station's not going away, and Minuteman's not going away for 30 years. So then we talked about a couple of different ways to show, you know, just sort of put on the radar those other projects. So one is just simply in that little space up there, you know, any other high costs would happen here. Another way is, Chrissy and I talked about, just a little kind of corner graph with some of that other material. This is just the fiscal borrowing, and you're gonna be able to see it better on the next slide. I just wanted to kind of give a preview of what I thought you were asking for, Christy, and I just think it's a little busy myself. So maybe.
I was imagining that rather than the number lines on the bottom, just one bar for each project, not related to specific years, but saying in the SIP, you're talking about adding a bar of this size for each project, some point over the next 5 years.
So the bar is the debt service?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can talk about that as well. I would find that confusing because the breakout of the main chart is the debt service payments over time, and you're thinking stack them?
I'm thinking of putting a Lego. Each project is the debt service, for a year's worth of debt service for that project. So here are the various heights of Legos.
So just
could be
that, like
added.
that last column, basically? except-
Yeah, but broken out horizontally.
Okay, so that's a possibility. This is what it looks like if you put those municipal potentials in where they may fall. All the black and gray up top. It's not going to print very well. It was getting very colorful. So, we've got sidewalk 1 and sidewalk 2 because in the CIP it's split into two $7.5 million borrows. But it's also, the original 7.5 was projected as a possible FY24 endeavor. Clearly didn't happen. So it's not anywhere that I have seen on the radar of the select board to do that this coming year. But again, because nothing's been discussed as an actuality, it's all projections and long-term planning of possibilities. I just sort of said, well, what if we did it, the first half FY25, the second half in FY26, and then so on with some of the others. The ladder truck is, dated to start when I've got it in the bridge design construction, replacement of the fire truck. Those are in the CIP as potential start dates. So that's what the other municipal potential borrowing does to our debt service chart. And then the only other piece is a Conant school, maybe. It's not in their 5-year SIP right now. It's probably 5 years out, even if MSBA said yes tomorrow. I grabbed a $40 million number based on the projected cost if we refurbished each elementary school back when we looked at the twin school. And I started it in FY30 and gave it again a 4.85% interest rate, which is not accurate because who knows what the interest rates will be at that point. But just as a modeling out potentials, this is sort of what I've put together as options if we want to include these in a visual way in a presentation.
I know Yesha wants to say something.
Nice job.
Thanks.
It's a lot of work. Thank you. And
Oh, sorry.
maybe verbally, we can say that since this was sort of a conservative estimate of what the rates are today, that it could actually go higher than that, right? So, looking at how much those estimates are over what they are today, I think we're looking an override in the eye. Just possibly.
These are inherently
Oh, these are
overrides.
excluded.
These are
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
excluded debt.
That's right.
Right.
Steve?
Well, this is why when back in FY 19 or 20, and we told people their taxes would go up for a couple of years and come down again, we probably shouldn't have said that.
Honestly, that's a lot of the point here, is driving that message home to the decision makers.
And getting back to what we were talking about a while ago, that excluded debt piece of the tax bill is getting to be a very significant, or will be a very significant piece of the puzzle, more significant than it was way back then, but will be going forward. So it's very hard to just talk about operating budgets, because where'd Dave go? When you're talking about the effect of the average single-family tax bill, this is going to have an impact. Now, I'm going to really get you mad at me if I want to go back to the first one.
No, I do too. Go on, tell me more.
No, the very first one you showed. No, keep going back. I want to talk about the, whatever we call it, the fiscal flexibility chart or the. So I was thinking about this, and it kind of talks about what we don't have control over in terms of impacting the budget. And it specifies a couple, three things that we don't have real control over. This year, there's even bigger things we had control of last year or the year before. But at this point, all of our collective bargaining agreements are settled. And it's on the municipal side for the next 2 years, we have no control over compensation. And on the school side, for the next 3 years, we have no control over compensation. So this is understated.
And to your point, you indicated at the last meeting that the health insurance trust this year is going to go up by 10%.
Probably, I still haven't seen our numbers for this year. But.
So if that does happen, you know, if you take our projected revenue increase and you add up our Minuteman assessment and our Middlesex retirement assessment at 6% and a health insurance increase at 10%, that's our added available spending over last year's budget, and as you can see, it's not an ad.
And like I said, we have collective bargaining agreements that we're now locked into.
Right, so the amount of ability to manipulate the rest of the budget
even less.
is even less, it's even smaller. Yeah.
Roland?
And I think the other thing too to keep in mind is, we don't know what interest rates are going to do. There's none of us have the crystal ball on that one. I mean, they're talking maybe raising it still, again, upwards of a half a point. We don't know that. It's going to be a fact or what's going to happen. So inflation kicks in, right? So we don't know what that ladder truck, which is originally projected at 1.6 million, could be 2 million, could be 2.2. We just don't know that. And then we're going to look at also other equipment that's going to be replaced in the years coming out too. And primarily I think of more like police cruisers, because those are rotated every, 3 years or so?
I think those are done in the budget, though.
Yeah, they're done within the budget, but it's going to impact that budget because that's escalated substantially. You know, and they want to get a new pickup truck for the cemeteries or whatever because of the escalation the last 2 years, 3 years. Still plays into that, so that even takes that budget, makes it squeezing it even more, and that gives less of what we can spend money going forward. Even with the 2.5% raise every year, it still doesn't drive into that. So it's just things we should be, back of mind, keep that in the back of our heads as we go through these. And I think more like this, the more that you, like with the other ones that you added on, I kind of like that because that says, hey, this is our understanding now, but it could be higher because we don't know what's going to happen with prevailing wages and with escalation of future dollars, what things are going to cost. So this at least brings it to the forefront, kind of saying, you want to do this, this is what our debt service is going to be if it was done today or done last year. Nobody knows what tomorrow holds. So something to keep in mind.
Jason?
I also would like to echo what Isha said about this being a heck of a lot of work, and it looks great. What I'm not seeing, and it's probably because I haven't articulated this desire very well, but I might actually be able to articulate it this time. If we take a 2.5% operating increase every year, take that as a given, or put it at 3, because that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years. If you layer on top of that what this debt does, what does it do to the rate of increase to the average single-family tax bill? And I think if we had that number, I think we're going to be surprised to see that it's years of an increase, of a year-over-year increase that we've not seen in the last 20 years. It's a rate of increase in taxation that we then can turn to the populace and say, we're looking at 5 or 6% year-over-year tax increases for 3 or 4 years. I sincerely hope your salary is going up 5 or 6% a year. Mine's not. If you're on Social Security, you had one good year last year when they finally did a true up. But if not, please be advised that what you're voting for, what you're approving, is going to take a greater and greater proportion of your take-home pay. And that's the one component that I don't see yet. Maybe you have it on a slide yet, but that's the one component that I don't see that I would love for us to be able to articulate to town meeting.
So can I just, okay. So my understanding of this short document should be that it's 3 slides. The first one of these, and the last one. And that this is the pre-budget ALG, hey, just to get in front of you, you need to know this. You need to have this in your face so that when you're making your budgeting decisions, you're not surprised afterwards and trying to cut back afterwards without any chance of, fiscally looking into this with a real strict eye going forward. And then this more expanded debt service slide and the impact
Goes in the POV.
goes in the POV.
I agree.
From my point of view, this distracts the eye, to me, from the first slide and this slide. And I personally, but again, and this is going to be Christy and the people in the room, to decide for this conversation what's going to be the most useful and what the conversation needs. So we'll get you that information however you want it.
Okay, so doing the layover for the average single-family tax bill, I find with reserving for the POV. I would say if we wanted to make it visually pop, go to the last of the graph slides, rather than, so at some point when we start getting into the projections, take everything that is already solid plan of record. It can't be changed at this point, it's already been approved. Make it one color. It's solid, that can't be changed anymore. We are committed to it. So stop breaking out all the different things, because it's money we have to spend. And then you get to see all the Lego bits of the proposed things.
I agree with that entirely in theory, but at first I was like, okay, wait, too much of this chart. And then I look at it, I was like, oh my God, I love it. Because what it shows you is 2 of the sidewalk projects are gonna cost what a fire station and Minuteman costs us.
Yeah.
And without having those broken out as that's what the fire station and Minuteman, the second you told me, we're gonna spend a fire station's worth on one part of our sidewalks.
Maybe.
Well, but
That's
what's in the
that's
SIP.
the conversation we have to have in ALG.
You do need to have it in ALG, and you need to have it in ALG over the course of the year, but this first sort of setting, I mean, unless they're bringing up that they're thinking about doing it in FY '25, this is a conversation for the coming years, not for FY '25, which is what you're trying to get in front of?
No, we're trying to get in front of all the years. We need to have a strong focus on FY '25, but our point is to say, okay, put your FY '25 in the context of this is what you're telling us is coming. This is what you're telling the select board is coming. This is what everyone's saying when you stand up in front of a town meeting and saying, this is what's coming. So let's look at FY '25 in that. Are we going to do half the sidewalks, like you say? Is it worth taking that on? Does it change which have sidewalks? When you're looking at the big DPW debt coming, are we going to reprioritize? Because FY '25 is,
And/or are you absolutely sure you want to build the DPW at 35 million, or have you completely exhausted all possible cost savings? Because while you say that in town meeting, maybe when you look at the slide, you realize maybe we don't want to spend $2 million a year on this building. Maybe we do want to sharpen our pencil.
I'm not, again, I'm not in the room, and it's you're driving this. I'll make you the graph you want to take into the room with you.
Then I'm fine with this. I like this graph.
okay. Yeah, at first I wanted to take Conan out, but I think it's good to have Conan in there. Recognizing that we don't know what years these are happening in.
And is the admin building in there?
No.
Again, that's nowhere on anybody's, I wouldn't even begin to know how to formulate that one. It's not in their SIP. It's not in anything they've discussed. And I don't have any kind of guess at how much money would be invested or, yeah. So no, but I mean, I will, if you want to give me a mock-up of something that might.
So rather than try and trace down all the possibilities, can I ask you for one last data point?
Sure.
What is the size Lego brick of $1 million in borrowing at 4.8% over 30 years?
That is the
ladder
bridge
truck?
design construction, third from the top. It is 0.9 million.
0.9?
Yeah, so that's your answer. It's that sliver. It's that third sliver. So you've got here, is this easier? You've got,
Sidewalk 1, sidewalk 2, and then.
you've got Conant here, and then you've got replace the fire truck, which was 1 point something million, and then the bridge design construction here was 0.9. It's $900,000. So
Sorry, there are 2 bridge design
there
constructions
is, that's
on
why I said it's the top one.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So it's a sliver, it's noise in this graph. You know, I mean, it's not money, but as far as everything else, it's equal to the bridge design construction.
Okay.
I think the other bridge design construction is 1.1 million, so between the two of them, you know, that's those little slivers in there.
Roland?
What just jumped out at me looking at this is sidewalk 1 costs as much as the budget for Minuteman Tech.
Well, that's not the budget, that's our
the
building.
excluded debt.
Excluded debt, so
That's the
Well, that's what I was saying, and
you know, it's
It's the
like,
debt service for.
it's our fire station.
yeah, it's kind of,
The two that get out of the
Scary.
fire station.
The black and then the darker gray square above it are sidewalk 1 and sidewalk 2, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Scott?
I have just a simple question, and I'm going to point because I'm closer to a laptop. If you had the 10 million on here, which I'm sure that's the next increment, would it be right there?
Yeah.
And the intention of showing the 7.5 and not the 10 is to show that we're going way past it, but not to show the magnitude of the 10 million?
And that, and there are so many things up here that it just became so tight at the top that it
Gotcha.
was hard
Okay.
to read.
All
But
right.
both of those things are true.
All right.
Yeah, I can throw that line back up there.
No, I just asking the question.
But yeah, I had to select the button that said, yeah, show me the data even that has popped off the top of your constraints here. It becomes a big number.
No, more importantly, it's almost 400% of where we were. You know, if you look at that $2.5 million number, it looks like it runs right through the center of, or just below the North Acton Fire Station. So that's the debt that we've accrued. Well, we got Minuteman's on top of it. So it's 3 times, it's 300% growth. That's huge, and that needs to be spoken to at ALG.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Dave?
Christina, a few minutes ago, you said, from your point of view, was that pun intended?
Probably not.
Diane?
These are really great slides. I'm just kind of walking in the middle of this, so I didn't get a chance to watch your last meeting, but I've been trying to, kind of track track this. So I was on the school committee for 6 years, and I can appreciate you're trying to use these as a tool to communicate to people who really need more of a high-level picture. This is a great footnote to a slide where
So
you're.
this is for ALG specifically?
Okay.
We haven't discussed putting this in our general.
But even
for the-
ALG, you have school committee liaisons there who are, that's going to be, this is, to me, this is like everything. It's everything we hope to do, like Conant, which has good bones. It really does need only a reno. It doesn't need a new building. And it has like, I think some of the things we're locked into. I think for people who, like the school committee, who really need a high-level picture, what are we locked into? What do we wish for and hope for and kind of plan for, but we don't know if we can afford it? That's not clear from this slide, although it's a very cool slide. So I just would, I'd urge you to consider, who your audience is and what the most effective graphic is going to be to communicate clearly, especially to the school committee, because they hold their budget in their hands. They control the budget. So just some thoughts to share. Thank you for doing this. It's really great.
As a former member of the school committee, what would be visually impactful to you? What would take this slide from being what you just called a footnote to being a warning beacon, which is what we're kind of trying to get across
I think
here?
that this is really important because this does combine what we hope to do and, what the costs of like sidewalks are compared to like some like big projects that we've done. That's really important information. But the thing that is going to, I think, be most impactful to people who don't really have a background in finance is what are we locked into? What do we hope for? Somehow differentiate those two things.
That's why I was thinking,
And,
put the locked-in
like that's,
liability
like
in one
what's the
color.
reality? And so that we can approach our budget process with that in mind really clearly.
This was what Jason had talked about, with taking the debt we've already accrued, that we already have, and making that all be one color. Do you think that would be more meaningful? Because I liked that you saw that the sidewalks are the same as like a fire station, but you think there's more?
I think for ALG, this will be a more powerful slide, but for the school committee, the other, Jason's kind of vision will be something that they can use in the budgeting process.
Thank you.
I can give you several mock-ups. I mean, and you can include them all or none of them, but to me, what I'm hearing, I think, is we have this one, and it shows our current debt, and it's all colorful and broken out. And then I can have this one, and then a third option that does block it, just so you can really differentiate between what we are already paying on and what we may potentially in the future pay on.
You could even, because you have like black and shades of gray, you could start the black at the DPW spending, and then everything black in the
Yeah.
more amorphous shades of gray.
Yep.
They haven't happened. Okay,
It's not going to print well if it's not in color.
that's
but-
very true.
But yeah, okay.
Thank you. Do we think have we talked enough about the last slide?
Yes, so this one, I just remarked today, and remembering that Steve had made the comment about a health insurance trust. And, I got an email from Adam and looked through some of the concerns from last year, but they were really not about this slide, other than, does the Middlesex assessment in the health insurance trust, is that for the schools and the town? And the answer is yes, that's for the schools and the town. So, that's the combined, I believe, payments for both. So the bottom line is, the revenue projections either have to change and trend higher, or the assessments have to trend lower than expected. Now, we know Minuteman's not going to. They've already told us what that's going to be. And we can count on Middlesex to come in at 6%.
Does this include the COLA that Middlesex just did?
No.
So these numbers should be higher?
Maybe.
Does anyone remember when that's kicking in?
No. So,
So it should be in FY '25?
so it should be 8.5%. So, and, so we have a problem, right? Last year, we said, hey, there's only $367,000 or whatever between your projected revenue increase and your fixed costs, and this year it's actually worse, even though they did a lot. They really did a lot, and I think that's important, that they did a lot to pull in costs. And we're just in this situation because we're in this situation, not necessarily poor planning or poor spending. I'm not saying every dollar was spent perfectly, but, our job is to just say, here's where we are. This is the numbers you're giving us, and this is what we're finding with them, and we have a problem. And also, by the way, on top of this problem, the debt service and the potential adding on to that as well. So it's problematic.
I just want to back up a second. We still need to update that Middlesex number, right, from this, where it is?
Yeah, so if the answer is 8.5, right? So then, I can't do math in this. Yeah, so I need to increase this number, and then that will go up.
Scott?
Kind of just a new guy question. Historically, how accurate have the revenue projections been? On a look back, so let's say if we went to 2020, and whatever we projected, or whatever there was a revenue projected for 2020, let's say it was $2 million revenue growth, revenue increase. Historically, how accurate have those been? Are we coming, or are those projections coming within a reasonable range of expectation? Are they wildly different? I'm just
I'm going to say
curious.
something that someone who's been here even longer will tell me if I'm correct on. The school, when Dave Verlito came on, he tightened up their projections. They used to be extremely conservative, and so they'd have larger turnbacks. And he said, look, we need to really make this more realistic. So those numbers change not that far back. They're closer, a narrower spread. And the town has not had a similar change, but Jason can speak to that.
The overall, the revenue is probably accurate to within 1% to 2% every year. There are certain things about state law that says you can't budget any more local receipts than you had in the year past, even though the year that just came in was much better. So they lock in some very conservative budgeting practices. So, yeah, we usually get about $500,000 more in town revenue than we expected, and we expected that we budgeted. And usually the spending is within even tighter.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. On the school side, there was 3 years in a row where the revenue, I'm going to call it a miss, even though it's not a miss, the revenue mismatch, that's a better word. The revenue mismatch and the spending mismatch were, for 3 years in a row, were all less than 1%, which is not bad on a $110 million entity. On the town side, to echo what Steve said, there are larger percentage misses on the town side than there are on the school side. But the good news is for the 9 years that I've been here, they've always been to the upside because they've been overly conservative in budgeting the revenue side. God forbid we have the opposite of that 1 year. But, I remember the year of the insulate building fees. That was upside potential. There was a year where the excise tax was wildly off from a percentage, but it was wildly off to the good side. So when the revenue misses, it tends to miss on the conservative side, on the municipal side. On the school side, they're very, very narrow bands.
There's your update. it's,
Big
Yeah.
change. So we just, before going into ALG, should confirm that actual dollar numbers that works out to?
so the revenue is from the ALG spreadsheet.
No,
So
I'm sorry,
that's-
I just mean the Middlesex retirement.
That it is 8.5%, yeah.
Yes.
We should confirm that it is 6% plus 2 point, but that the anticipation is 6% again with an added 2.5%.
I'm not sure that that math works, I think.
It does seem like a lot.
Simply because it was 2.5% on certain things, not on the full assessment. It was like on wages or something like that.
Oh, so it's not a
it
full
was not-
2.5% over 6.
It's not 2.5 over everything.
Got it, okay. Well, then it's better than that, but it's still not good. So yeah, we'll get those final numbers so that we're dealing with a number that they won't argue with us on.
Okay, do we want to have that final number before voting on this recommendation?
I believe that the number is the number. Let's stipulate that we want that number to be accurate, but I think we're ready to go.
All right, do we have a motion? I'm sorry, we'll have a motion and then debate. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion if you tell me what we're voting on.
We're voting on, sorry, we haven't quite decided,
Are
have
we
we?
voting on ALG guidance for our
Yes.
ALG reps?
Yes,
And that is contained in what we've just been discussing?
yes.
And using this document as the preliminary conversation, as the opening conversation.
All right, then I move, we approve that.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry, discussion.
Roll it, sir.
Did you have just anything to discuss, Roland? Okay, I think we're all set. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay? Any abstentions? No? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. And thank you for the excellent work, Christine.
Good job, Christine.
All right, next item up is liaison reports. Do we have any? I can speak to the select board meeting 2 weeks ago. Trying to think of what was, there's a lot of stuff they talk about that is interesting, but probably does not need to be shared in this forum. Yeah, nothing comes to mind that actually. One thing they've started doing is at the end of every meeting, having a review of how the meeting went, which is interesting to watch. It's not something I'm inclined to do here.
Amen.
Just letting you know. And I saw some, but not all of last night's meeting. Did you watch it, Jason?
I did not.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. What was interesting from the meeting? No, that was interesting, but again, that's not financially important. I'm trying to remember from last night's meeting.
You can message us.
Yeah, I'm not coming, I'm just filtering through what was actually going to have financial impact, and nothing comes to mind that did, so I will update you later when they actually do something I think we need to talk about.
From the school building committee perspective, the last school building committee meeting was the shortest one ever. I think it was 14 minutes long. That's because we really are getting down to the end bits of this. There is still some contingency left. Not all contingency is spoken for, but it's getting vanishingly, dwindlingly small. But again, we're, 95, 96, 97% done with the project, which is great news. And I will also say that a couple of minutes of that exceptionally short meeting was also in remembrance of Bob Evans, because he served on that committee literally right up until the end. And so, of course, today was Bob Evans' service just across the street here. And so I'd just like to say that this committee obviously remembers him, but the school building committee also remembered him as well. So that was a part of an update worth mentioning.
Anyone else? Okay, we are currently scheduled to have a meeting on August 8th. The presenter I was hoping to have come in is unavailable. it ends up it's hard to schedule people over the summer. Is there anyone who you all would specifically like to hear from that I can bring in? Are there any topics you specifically would like to discuss then? Roland?
I don't know the last time we had a quarterly update from finance on the revolving funds, et cetera, and how they ended up. I mean, I think we should, that's something that Brian used to do quite often, and we haven't really had one in a long time.
No, we had,
We had
Ellie
one.
Anderson was in.
We had one, but still,
In
it's,
the-
the fiscal year's ended.
Fiscal year's
ended
ended.
3 weeks ago, so.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we should see if we can schedule that for September.
For September?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
But
know-
no, I'm just talking about for the first week of August.
Yeah, well, my point there is it's last quarter and how it did in the last quarter and the year. So I just, something to keep on our radar that we should request that. August, I think it's going to be kind of tough because a lot of vacation time. I'm gone for a week, et cetera. So I don't know if anybody else off the top of my head right now.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I don't know if we, I don't know who to approach about it, but I would love to get an update on the planning for compliance with the MBTA law.
Did you have something, Christine?
I was going to say, if there is a resolution at any point from Minuteman, I will reach out immediately to try to get Pam on our agenda, but I don't know when that'll be, but it's just going to be a rolling.
Well,
on
and they
my-
generally overlap with our meetings, right?
Unfortunately, they do tend to have their meetings the same night as our meetings, but I'll see what I can do to get her here as soon as we have an answer on that.
Scott, Roland?
I forgot what it was, right? The dispatch. Get an update on that.
The RACC?
Yeah, because I did have a conversation with the chief of police at the police camp for kids this summer, last week. But I think we should have an update as a committee of what's going on with that. And I think the town manager should come and give us an update.
I will see if I can get any of these people in for August 8th. I am out of town next week, which will make it hard, so if I can't get anyone to confirm before Friday, we might not be having an August 8th meeting unless something comes up after, or you want to be in part of the, I'll be here for the meeting, I just won't be here to post the agenda.
I'll be here until the 13th, so,
Okay? But people are generally available, is what I'm hearing.
yes.
Okay? For the next meeting, yes. Okay, wonderful. I guess I'll let you know whether we're having it or not. Any other announcements or committee business? No? Vlad, would you please make a motion?
I move to adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay, thank you, everyone. Good night.